No, don't interpret discovery interviews by feel. That makes it too easy for us to trick ourselves. If you have spent any time with lean startup and customer discovery, then you've been told to write down your assumptions about your business model and run discovery interviews to validate those assumptions. You've probably heard this so many times that you take it for granted. Not me, I question the premise. I've worked with founders who listed their assumptions, and then when it comes to validation, they have no structure. They basically say, I know a validated assumption when I see it. In my experience, founders don't know what they're looking for, and they don't know if they've found it. This is a recipe for pursuing bad ideas. I hate that most founders waste a year pursuing startup ideas that never get customers. And this is despite so many of them trying to use data and the scientific process to avoid that painful outcome. I believe that the way that founders today validate startup ideas is at best quasi-scientific, and it contributes to all of this wasted time and effort. My goal with Nascent is to empower founders so that they can vet startup ideas in days, not years. To do that, I'm challenging the way that we analyze customer discovery interviews. This episode digs into the Yardstick of Pain, which is a tool that founders can use to repeatably analyze interviews so that they can make better, faster decisions about whether to pursue their startup. Welcome to the Nascent podcast. I'm Mike Vladimir, and I believe that founders can be decisive with minimal data. Nascent is a structured, repeatable way to reveal the potential for a startup to get customers. And if you're pivoting to a new startup idea, this is especially relevant for you. So please hit that subscribe button. This is episode 27. No, don't interpret customer discovery interviews by feel. Instead, use the Yardstick of Pain. This episode is a follow-up on the last episode, episode 26, where we discussed the importance of high-quality data. Essentially, only recordings enable error correction. This is the only way to ensure that you have ground truth. The perspective of Nascent is that a startup is a project in creating new knowledge, and recordings are critical to creating a stable foundation for your project. The good news is that it has never been easier to record, and we have techniques to overcome any awkwardness. In this episode, we're covering data analysis, what to do with the recordings once you have them, using a tool called the Yardstick of Pain. Throughout these episodes, we're trying to address a challenge framed by Richard Feynman, who said, "The first principle is that you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool." Today, when founders want to be rigorous and thoughtful and not fool themselves, they're told to write down their assumptions about their business model and then validate those assumptions. But what specifically constitutes assumptions? And how does validation work exactly? I would say that founders today use criteria that I would describe as you know a validated assumption when you see it. As I mentioned in episode 23, I spent years designing test systems. It's taken me a while to see this, but now I can't unsee it, and I hope that you can't either. If the way that you're evaluating something is, I know it when I see it, then you are in trouble. Test systems must have consistency and repeatability. A feelings-based system is ripe for Richard Feynman's risk of letting you fool yourself. So let's get into Nascent's more structured approach. When founders run interviews, what exactly should they be looking for? I believe that startups operate on invisible forces, and emotional pain is the critical invisible force that you as a founder need to search for because it's what powers startups. So when a founder wants to create a startup, when they have an idea for a product, the only thing that matters is that a product implies people in pain. That somewhere out in the world might be people in pain. The founder's job is to figure out who exactly are these people and how much pain do they really feel. A founder wants to create a startup because they believe that people in pain exist. So go talk to those people and see how they really feel. This is how a founder's idea for a product determines how they search for people in pain. For example, we talked about how the Uber app implies frustrated consumers who are blocked from getting somewhere, and how the precision agriculture startup called Criterion implies that there are farmers who are worried about using pesticides. Frustration is an example of pain. Worry is an example of pain. This is what I'm talking about when I say people in pain. Previously, I introduced Nascent's 4-part structure to search for people in pain. In episode 26, we talked about how to gather data by getting out of the building and how to capture data using audio recordings. Now, today in episode 27, we're getting into how to categorize data like a nurse in a hospital and how to iterate like a wildcatter searching for oil. So as you're playing along at home, I hope that you've started to record your discovery interviews. Now let's get into how you can make sense of what those interviewees tell you. When you listen to recorded interviews, I want you to pretend that you are a nurse. You're going to categorize the interview data like a nurse in a hospital. So nurses have this really interesting challenge where they have to help patients who cannot communicate, such as patients who don't speak English. There is a lot of reasons that a patient can't communicate, but the nurse still needs to understand how that patient feels. So how do nurses overcome this challenge? They have an awesome tool called the Wong-Baker Faces Pain Rating Scale. I have a picture of it on the Nascent Miro board, link in the show notes. Essentially, it's a 6-part scale. It shows 6 faces ranging from one extreme where the person is so miserable that they're crying, to the other extreme where they're so cheerful that they're smiling ear to ear. So the way this works is that the nurse holds up the Wong-Baker scale and the patient just points to one of the faces to indicate how they feel. That's it. That's the whole tool. As founders, what we're going to do is use a simplified version of this scale. We do not need all 6 buckets. We can actually simplify it down to 3: sad, neutral, and happy. So we'll use that recorded conversation to analyze how the interviewee feels. We're going to categorize an interviewee's emotions as either hurting or fine or joyous. That's it, just 3 buckets. We distill the interviewee down into one of these 3 categories, and that's what constitutes a yardstick of pain. When I teach this to founders, a question I often get is, can we split the difference? Can we say that somebody is both hurting and fine? No, there is no sitting on the fence. You have to pick only one of the 3 states. These are very rigid bins. Another question I often get is, how many interviews do founders need to run? The short answer is, it depends on the founder and the data that they gather, but the key is that we want to work in small batches, which is in contrast to conventional customer discovery, where programs will typically require founders to run 100 interviews, and that can take months. This is the case, for instance, for the I-Corps run by the National Science Foundation. Whether founders participate in a structured program or they just run discovery interviews on their own, I often see them spend months running interviews. With Nascent, our goal is to spend days. To do this, we work in batches like a wildcatter who prospects for oil. I really love the story of the discovery of oil. When wildcatters went to drill for oil, they did not go a mile deep before deciding whether or not it was a good idea for them to have put in all that effort. To me, this is akin to a founder who runs 100 interviews. Wildcatters also don't go an inch deep at a time either. They go in increments of a few feet. After a wildcatter drills a few feet deep, they look for signals whether or not it makes sense to increase their investment, to keep going deeper. So as founders, our plan is to get a batch of 5 interviews and decide whether or not we want to continue with the project. We don't want 1 or 2 interviews that is not enough for a useful signal, and we don't want to invest in 30 or 40 interviews because by then we've gone way too far before thoughtfully considering whether or not we are using our time effectively. I have found that about 5 interviews makes a good batch size, but we don't need to be rigid. 6 or 7 interviews is fine. The key here is that we don't want to get caught up running interviews. The longer we run interviews, the easier it is for us to get distracted by all the other aspects of our startup that we're so excited to build, the product and the marketing plan and everything else. By working in batches, we're able to stay focused and be decisive. So this is the 4-part framework to search for people in pain, where we gather data, capture data, categorize data using the Yardstick of Pain, and iterate in batches. So what does this look like in practice? Well, every founder that I've ever worked with always starts with an idea for a product that implies people in pain. So our goal is to speak with folks who we think could match the description of those people in pain. And we don't just have open-ended conversations. We specifically ask questions that will let us categorize an interviewee's emotions during their most recent experience with the problem that we hope to address with our startup. Let's go back in time and apply this 4-part framework to Uber. If that founder wanted to use Nascent to evaluate their idea, we would have said that the Uber app implies there are consumers frustrated by transportation. So the founder would have acted like a nurse and asked those consumers, when was the last time that you tried to get somewhere and how was your experience? This is basically what happened to me when I worked with the founder of Criterion, who wanted to help those worried farmers. He acted like a nurse and he asked the farmers, when was the last time that you put pesticide on your fields and how was your experience? Regardless of any specific product idea, the key is for founders to ask about the interviewee's experience and to tease out their emotions, their emotional state. By asking questions like, when was the last time you had this experience? How did it feel? Then we categorize the emotion in their response. One interviewee might say, oh, that happened to me last week and it was fantastic. Fantastic means they felt joyous. Most interviewees are going to say something like, yeah, I did it and it was okay. Those interviewees are fine. And if we get lucky, somebody might say, oh yeah, I did that and it was horrible. That is what we're looking for. That is someone who is hurting. And that is the first sign that a person in pain someday might become a customer. Again, this 3-part scale of hurting and fine and joyous is your yardstick of pain. All we care about is pain, because that is what is going to give us our signal about whether or not to invest more time in our startup idea. This categorization exercise is our first step towards a more detailed measurement framework. In future episodes, we will flesh this out, and I will show you how to go from categorizing emotions to quantifying interviewees in dollars. So this is the beginning of what I think is a better way to analyze discovery interviews. Again, this is in contrast to how things work today, when founders run discovery interviews using self-reported data, their memory, and their notes. Founders then interpret interviews by feel, using an approach of, I know a validated assumption when I see it. All of this seems rigorous, but it is just a recipe to fool ourselves. Instead, searching for people in pain and applying the yardstick of pain is a structured alternative. We take each interviewee and we categorize them into one of 3 bins, either hurting or fine or joyous. And because we have recordings, we can always correct our errors. So if you are a founder of a startup with no customers, here's what you can do next. Try exploring this concept that products imply pain. Just use some of the products in your regular day-to-day life. Literally, you can look around you right now. Every product that you see in this world implies people in pain. Tylenol implies people with headaches. Chairs imply people who have a sore back from standing up. I want you to look around and just pick a product and try to articulate aloud what is the name of that product and what is the pain that you think it implies. And we're going to start to build this muscle using these existing products that we're familiar with. And once we can do that with existing products, then we can start to apply it to products that don't yet exist. In other words, the products that you want to build with your startup. So if you know of another founder who is still interpreting discovery interviews by feel, please send them this episode. And if your startup is pivoting and you want to ensure that you don't waste another year on a bad idea, let's get on a call. You can schedule time with me using nascentidea.com. I always welcome feedback via email. My address is podcast@nascentidea.com, or you can tweet me @nascentidea. All the details are in the show notes. And please subscribe and leave a rating. It really helps. We've been talking about Nascent's 4-part structure for discovery interviews. Gather data by getting out of the building, capture data with audio recording, categorize the data like a nurse in a hospital, and iterate in batches like a wildcatter. In the next episode, we'll apply this 4-part framework to a case study where you can see it in action. Okay, founders, let's use data to weed out bad ideas and reveal startup ideas with the possibility of success. You've got this.